I was asked to talk a bit about a typical fundraising process today. So I think it's very important to let you know that obviously I'm not the king of fundraising or something. So obviously everything I tell you is just based on my experience. So I have no expectation whatsoever that everything that I will tell you that worked out for us is working for everyone. However, talking a bit about myself, before I started in the cannabis industry, which is an industry that's very close to my heart, I was working for almost 10 to 15 years in the tech startup scene and also in the VC scene. So during that time, which is normally very typical that you do fundraising in these industries, I think I learned a thing about two in fundraising that actually helped a lot for our path with the Sanity Group to actually do the right way of pitching to investors, to actually successfully raising the funds that we raised. Just last week, we announced our 35 million Series A, which was a huge success for the company. And I think during this, we actually talked probably to more than 100 investors on the way, some of them a bit less, some of them a bit more. And I think the things that we learned from those investors, based on the feedback that we received, based on the challenges that we had, I think actually can help many people in the cannabis industry. And because I believe that we as an industry should stand together and should help each other to make this whole industry bigger, I think there's no confidentiality in telling you what our challenges were in this process and why I believe we succeeded in this industry. So quickly about myself, I mean, I mentioned already, I'm a tech guy, originally started not in the tech industry, but I started at BCG, being a digital guy there, helped companies digitalizing in the beginnings of the 2010s. Afterwards, I founded a big company in Australia called The Iconic, which is the biggest online fashion retailer over there. We raised, I think, a total 250 million before we IPO'd as a global fashion group to the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. And then most recently, I was founding the Sanity Group about 2 years ago. And just recently, we raised, as I just mentioned, our Series A. And today, I want to tell you a bit about, as I mentioned already, about the experiences that we did there and what were actually the things that worked well and the things that didn't work so well. So I mentioned already to you, I come from the tech industry. And when you ask tech VCs, why do you invest in a certain company? It's the 3 M's. So can anyone guess what the 3 M's are? What are the 3 key factors? I heard something? Yeah. Almost. I think management is the most important one. But one that's very important for every investor, is there a market? Is it actually worth? Is it something that we believe can be a unicorn one day? Because especially if you talk to VC investors, every single investment that they do, and I'd really talk specifically about VCs, they always have the aim that it should be a unicorn at some day. It's different from family offices, it's different from PE investors, it's different from many other investors, but for VCs, if they don't believe that has the potential to be a unicorn, they're normally turned a bit off by that, and that really is a bit in the question with the whole question regarding what the market size is. The second thing is the model. So is there a business model? Like what we do, does it actually bring revenues not only today, but does it have the potential to bring revenues in the future? And if yes, what are the unit economics? How does it work? How do you earn money in the long run? And is it sustainable or is it just a short-term thing? Remember that? That will become important later on in the presentation. And the third thing was already mentioned, and to be honest, last but definitely not least, the management, because if you talk to VCs, most of the time they say the management is the most important, and then after the management, if it's a good management, they will figure the rest out. If the model doesn't work, a good management will always reinvent the model, pivot, do something else. If the market doesn't work, they will adjust their business model to go to a different market. So that's the reason why here it's number 3, but in reality, it's number 1, because that's what the investors care most about. Because if you have a great business model and a great market, but they don't believe in the management team, they will still not invest. If they believe in the management team, but they're not sure about the market and the model, they still might invest in them because they believe in the people and not in the surroundings. So if you think about it, the market, which is the last thing I mentioned, you can argue it's there. If you look to North America, and you know, all of us know all the numbers about the size of the cannabis market, no matter who you ask, they differentiate, they are different. You cannot really rely on numbers, but the most updated number that a lot of people believe in is that the current North American market is around 25 billion. Some people say a bit less, some people say a bit more. But if you also look at the market cap of the top companies in the cannabis space in 2020, it has been 50 billion. So obviously you can argue the market is there. And there are unicorns in the US. Unicorns are the companies that are valued for more than $1 billion, especially among this group here. And some of you are sitting also here tonight. You can argue that there's a market. However, now we are in Europe, we are in the middle of Europe, we are close to Frankfurt, Germany. The question is here, only because it works in the US or North America, where we obviously have a very different regulatory environment, can you convince investors to actually invest into the European market? And do they really believe that something you see in the US or North America right now will repeat here in Europe? And if you think about it, and again, I think it's the most astonishing experience I ever made when I came from the tech industry and went into the cannabis industry, how crazy the forecasts were about how many gazillions the market will be in the next 5 to 10 years. And if you think about it, this is something, an old slide that probably is about 1.5 years old. It's from 2020. It's an old forecast from Prohibition Partners you see on the bottom right that shows you that the market has a big potential. If you really believe in these numbers or not, that is something that you can decide for yourself. However, you definitely could argue that there is a market, and the question is only how fast is the market developing, and are you able to develop it with the right innovative business models, and can you differentiate in these business models? And I think that's something that I also come to later on. So what you actually see, if you see these numbers, you think, well, there's definitely good teams out there. There must be business models out there. The market is huge. So normally you would say investing in cannabis, that must be a no-brainer. And I think if you would have asked people in 2019, it was really the case. In 2019, everyone believed the CBD industry would be $1 billion by now just in Europe. Everyone believed that the big countries would already allow recreational cannabis. So obviously that didn't happen. And that's the reason why, unfortunately, cannabis investment is not a no-brainer. And you feel always when you talk to investors, what are the typical challenges that you need to overcome in that process? And if you really think about it, and this is again based on my experience, and I don't want to say that this list is complete or completely right whatsoever, but I was actually going in the presentation or preparation of the presentation through my old emails, through my old discussion notes, and thought about what are the things that I heard the most in the market when I talk to investors. So what are the major challenges? Number one, it is the regulatory environment. Everyone believed 2 years ago that Europe is very quickly following the US example. Everyone a few years ago believed that the US will already by now federally legalized. So that obviously didn't happen. And that's the reason why a lot of investors who were very bullish 2 years ago are suddenly a bit more conservative in that market, because they say, maybe it comes over time, but we don't know. And VC investors, even though it's a bit of a fun fact, because VC means venture capital, so it is risk capital, but at the end of the day, these investors are risk averse, because if they don't believe that the chance of things happening quickly is actually coming in, because normally they have an investment frame of 3 to 5 years maximum, they don't invest. And that's the reason why the insecurity of the regulatory environment is something that currently stops big investors to put money into the European market. The second thing is, and that is something that I don't say by putting a finger, but I think it's just obvious that the big Canadian LPs very often have disappointed their investors. I don't need to have proof for that. You just need to look at the stock prices. So they went up and then suddenly they went down again. And obviously during this high up of the stock prices and companies like Cannabis Growth being worth more than 20 billion, investors were much more bullish on the market compared to the time after, when the stock market went down and actually the sales numbers didn't follow. So that is also the second thing that we hear quite a lot. Then, and that's actually something that I found very interesting during my time fundraising, is the consistent story. Because investors want to hear stories. They just don't want to hear, I sell CBD. Why? Yeah, because I sell CBD, it's a big topic. Or they don't want to say like, oh yeah, I'm in cannabis right now because cannabis is big right now. They want to hear why you do this. And I come to this later on. And if you do medical, well-being, and recreational, like many companies in the US, especially in Europe, which is slightly more conservative, you always face a kind of challenge that you need to prove. Why do you do medical on the one hand, but also work on recreational on the other hand? I think in Europe, it's not even that difficult for local companies because recreational is almost not possible. However, for American companies or US companies who want to go into the European market, very often you see that if they have big business in recreational in the US, that is something that is really hard for them to explain why they suddenly are medical experts in the European market. Then obviously that's something I already mentioned, the market's going slower than expected. A lot of things is actually one investor who finally invested in us actually last round told me once, Finn, I almost didn't open the email from you because I get almost 50 pitch decks of cannabis companies each week. And I absolutely have no means whatsoever to go through all of those decks and try to differentiate the wheat from the chaff, as we say in German, die Spreu vom Weizen zu trennen. And because I actually don't even know which ones of those are goods and what the indicators are of a good company and bad company, this market is actually dead to me because there's no means I can find out what's a good company and what's a bad company. And I think this is a problem we still have. And I think because cannabis is such a new industry, investors who are traditionally not in that industry have very big difficulties to find out which companies actually have substance, in which companies are as basically just promising things that at the end didn't happen. And I think if you look into the industry that we all work in, the cannabis industry, unfortunately, one thing that has happened too often was too big promises. And that is also the reason why this actually makes it very hard to believe. If there's a company that pitches, I have 2 billion revenues by 2025, and then investors see that, that is actually also making investors kind of skeptical, not only towards this specific company, but towards the whole industry. Then one thing that I didn't expect to be so hard, but I mean, me personally being a member of the conservative German party, CDU, I actually, even in my party, didn't expect that cannabis itself is still such a critical topic, even if we talk about only medical. But believe it or not, there are investors out there who say, no matter if it's medical or not, no matter if it's research or not, even if it's a finished pharmaceutical that you do research on, if it's based on cannabis, we don't touch it because cannabis is a drug and we don't want to be associated with it. And they call it the paper test. So what they mean with a paper test, they always say, if I read tomorrow in the newspaper that my fund is invested in cannabis, is it a good or a bad thing for me? And very often the investors say cannabis is still something bad, and that's the reason why we don't invest into this segment. Then, I mean, companies created too high expectations for consumer and well-being CBD. I think that is basically a truth. If you would be here 2 years ago, everyone probably would have thought CBD is the next big thing and going through the roof. I think by now we all know that it's not that easy and that it's actually not that straightforward as we thought. However, it's always affecting an industry bad if promises are too high and then in the end they don't come through. Then, and this is an interesting one, number 8, I heard this quite a lot. And that's actually, can you really justify to create an industry around one plant? So many traditional investors, they just see cannabis as an ingredient. And they say there's no industry around the caffeine ingredient. There is no industry around other ingredients. There is no industry around baldrian, for example, or valerian. So why would there be an industry around cannabis? Now we can all say that cannabis is a very special plant. It had not only one ingredient, but up to 110 if you count all cannabinoids. But that's something that's really difficult to explain of why you have a company which is just focusing on this one plant and not focusing on indications itself and be neutral when it comes to the ingredient. And I think that is something, especially in the medical community, that people say, why do you focus on that ingredient? Because why do you not open your eyes and be neutral and be agnostic and decide what the best ingredient for the patient is? Then, I mean, what we all know from the US, and I think that's also true in Europe, it's hard to create brands. And then last but not least, the future role of cultivation in Europe remains unclear. When the whole industry started, it was all about let's get cultivation no matter where. Then suddenly the first big production facilities in Denmark were built. Then suddenly Portugal opened. Then you figured out Portugal is cheaper than Denmark. Then basically the Canadians came in. Then suddenly Macedonia came in. And I think one thing, especially if you pitch cultivation, you very often hear from investors, what is the right location in Europe for cultivation? Is Germany the right location? Is Eastern Europe the right location? Is Southern Europe the right location? And that is, I think, is something that also always starts big discussions with investors. This comes back to insecurity. They just don't know yet And this is actually part of the industry being early. They just don't know yet where this all is going. So how did we overcome that? I needed to make sure how much time do I have left. You give me warnings? Okay, good. So I think one thing that's specifically very important for investors, especially in the VC world, they don't want to know what you do, they want to know why you do it. And if I start with what I'm doing, I could say I'm selling cannabis to pharmacies. That's what I'm doing. And many companies, when they fundraise, and the investors ask them, what do you do? They say like, yeah, I trade cannabis. I'm a cannabis wholesaler. But at the end of the day, what's more important, because that's actually something that shows also the vision and the long-term goal you have, is more the question why you do it. And if you think about it, why we do it, we want people to help getting access to the benefits of the cannabis plant and its ingredients. And I think that is also when it then comes to the holistic question of why you do well-being and medical, and maybe potentially even recreational at some point. You can always say that we do everything to focus on that why, because we believe all the three markets deliver somehow benefits, and we want the people to benefit from that plant. Then how we're doing it, this is we research the endocannabinoid system and see what it can do good for the human body. Not only the human, also animals are in focus more and more in our industry. But that is something how you do it. And then at the end, what you do it is creating products that are really actually sold in the market, may it be CBD products, may it be CBG products. But one thing I actually also realized during the time, you always have to see not only the next year and the year after, but what happens in the next 5 years. Will cannabis still be sold as floss in the pharmacies for medical use? Will there be finished pharmaceuticals? What will happen on the way there? Will really CBD products go through the roof, or at the end, will it be a combination of CBD, CBG, CBN, CBC, and other compounds? Will it be a combination of even terpenes with it? And where do we really see the benefit for humans in this? And that's the reason why pitching an investor, we are a CBD company, doesn't do the trick anymore. But what does the trick is that you want to exploit cannabinoids to make people's life better. And that's a very, very different message also in the eye of investors. So focus on the why. At the end of the day, what we believe is right for us. But as I said, I don't want to say that this would be right for everyone. It's really taking the cannabis plant and its ingredients and really understand what it will do good for people, and then basically develop products based on that. And this can be well-being products, this can be medical products, or whatever you think benefits the human body. But at the end of the day, I think this is very important to always not only look at how to go to market, but really think about what do I want to achieve with what I'm doing. So what do we do with the Sanity Group about that? And now it's not an advertising, but I'll quickly talk about what we do so you understand how we reacted in this fundraising to that. In the beginning, we believe that we need to be the cannabis hub. So we are not a well-being company, we are not a medical company, we are not a research company. We believe we are a cannabis hub that thinks about where can you use cannabis along the value chain to achieve the best possible result for your patients, customers, or whatever, to make them have a better life. And this is unlocking the benefits of the cannabinoid or cannabis plant, or even like synthetic cannabinoids, or even endocannabinoids, or even inhibitors of cannabinoids. So this is not only the cannabinoids itself, but actually everything in the ecosystem. And when we thought about, when we created the company, we want to become almost an incubator for ideas around cannabis. And as of today, we have 2 business units. One is Sanity Care, where our focus is really to have science-based, good, recognizable brands in the market. Sanatio being more the CBD purist, Vi being the young and innovative one, and this plays more the functional cosmetics one. What we also believe is that everything we do needs to be based on research. So for example, at the moment, we create a sports study with a lot of Bundesliga German soccer teams who are basically using CBD products for us. And then we measure the inflammation rate in their muscles to really see if we can scientifically prove that CBD is good for muscle regeneration and joint aches, and only then we will do a sports range out of our products. And that's the kind of thinking that we have in this hub, that we first think what can cannabis do, and then decide if it's a well-being product or a medical product. And on the other hand, we have the medical unit. So Viamed, you might have heard about it, is our medical wholesaler. So that's all about floss, extracts, dronabinol, and all the typical products you can get today in the cannabis industry. However, we believe that there's an evolution. And coming back to fundraising, which is the main question, I think if you just say, my business purpose is to sell floss to pharmacies, every investor will ask you, but what is your business purpose in 5 years from now? Do you still think you will be selling cannabis floss to pharmacies? Is that what it is? So at some point, you need to either argue, no, but I will sell floss to consumers, that goes into recreational, and what I'm doing today is just a preparation of that. Or you say, no, I will actually go the next evolutionary steps in the pharmacies, and that is not floss, that will be extracts, dronabinol, but at some point even finished pharmaceuticals. And what we do, and I think that's very important to the core, because we mean this cannabis hub very serious, what we really built, and that's something that we discussed very long with our investors, we really built an R&D hub. So we really have scientists, it's not a stock photo on the left, it's really our two head scientists who are sitting in the laboratory to think about new usages of cannabinoids for the endocannabinoid system. They're looking at existing studies, they work with academia, they look at universities, they really think about what are the most promising studies out there that help us to understand what cannabis can help, but also they actually come up with their own study hypothesis, for example, the sports study I just mentioned. And if you then think about it, the next step that we thought, if we really want to be a cannabis company that takes research serious, we also believe that we need to create a production facility. It's just very close by. It's not even, I think, 15 minutes with a car from here. I'll not tell you where it is because the mayor of that little village told us it shouldn't be public because he doesn't want cannabis tourists in his village. But it's actually a very nice vineyard, which is now already functional. So we will expect starting produce our own extracts in the next 3 to 6 months. We are just heading our GMP EU certificate, or not certification, but inspection. So hopefully everything goes well. But that is also something that will create, in our opinion, substance that we don't only want to sell cannabis, but really also work on creating good cannabis and really do this research driven. Then I already mentioned that, so I don't need to go too much into details. So believe that medicinal cannabis is an evolution. We believe today we are at floss, we are at flowers, we are at extracts, we might be at some point of kits or dronabinol. But for example, our next big project, which is currently with a finished prototype in the CE registration, is an extract-based medical device because we believe that's, in our opinion, the most efficient and safest form to take cannabis. You can consider it as a kind of asthma spray for cannabis, and we have the prototype actually done. It's currently within the EU certification bodies, so we hopefully believe that we can do it in the next 10 to 12 months, bring it to the market. And also, and that's also something that we are very serious about, we have 2 candidates for finished pharmaceuticals in the phase 2 trial right now, clinical phase 2 trial, and that's also the reason why you need a lot of money. But especially that balance between making revenues today, but still have a fantasy for the future. That is actually something that investors really like, and that is something that worked really well for us. So there are also other examples. I don't know if you saw that about a week ago, one of our investors, Christian Angermeyer, is with Atai Life Sciences. That's a big psychedelics incubator. They went to the stock market. They don't even have one working ingredient right now, but they're worth 2.3 billion. So you see it's still possible to raise money on future vision and not only on daily revenues. However, because so many people in the past raised funds in cannabis on future vision and not showing revenues, we believe that today for cannabis investors it's really important to keep that balance. I mean, I don't need to do too much in detail. I think the team, you mentioned it, management, is also something that's very important. So that's the reason why from the beginning, Fabian and I decided we are no medical experts. We are no experts in creating products. We are no cultivation experts. We are experts in building companies. And that's the reason why our aim from the beginning is to basically have the smartest people that ideally are smarter than us in the room. And that's the reason why from the beginning it was also a very, very strong focus of us to convince investors, but also build a great company to really put an emphasis on a big team. And many in the beginning asked, wow, you have such a big team, but your revenues are at the end little. But yes, at the end of the day, you need to have a big and good team to actually make sure that you create the infrastructure for the future revenues. So, I mean, also important, but I don't want to go too much into details here, what we did also from the beginning, and that is something that I took from the tech world. Your first investors you take on board are the most important ones. Because what we did from the beginning, we looked at investors that we thought can help us in the next financing round, who have a great network, who can help us along the way. And that's the reason why we actually did a very interesting mix between HV Capital, for example, a typical digital health investor from the tech world. Then Atlantic Food Labs, very strong on nutritional supplements and cosmetics development. We took Tom Stafford from DST, like a very big investor. DST is one of the biggest investors basically on the growth phase in the world. Then Karen from Casa Verde, that's the founder of Snoop Dogg, so it's an American cannabis fund. And Cherry is also a tech fund based in Berlin. And what we wanted to do with that, we really wanted to create, first of all, a network of great investors, but then also making sure that this enables us to create future rounds along the way. And then, and some of you saw that, really that was not on purpose, but funny enough, due to that network, we then suddenly get even more investors on board who are helping us today very much in our space. So for example, Mario, Andre, and Dennis, they are currently supporting us very strongly in our sports study regarding soccer teams. So they did a great job convincing doctors of German soccer teams to use our product to participate in our study. Steffi Giesinger has her cosmetics brand on her own, so we do a collaboration with her. For the Americans or non-Germans who don't know her, she's the winner of Germany's Next Top Model a few years ago. will.i.am takes CBD now for 5 years because it's prescribed. So we develop currently something for specific indications that I can talk about that are important for him. And that's the reason why over time we also collected some celebrity investors. Not because we think it's cool to have celebrity investors, but also something, and I think that's the next slide, what I think is our industry has to communicate. And what I mean with that is we need to make sure that cannabis becomes mainstream. And I don't talk about recreational here because that's a different topic. I talk about all these people in my political party who say, I don't even want to talk about cannabis, no matter if it's medical or not. These people have to understand that cannabis plays a role in today's society and that cannabis can play a role in the well-being of a lot of people out there. And that's the reason why one of our biggest aims was from the beginning, do good and talk about it. So really bringing actually cannabis back into the mainstream of the society. And that's the reason why we have been very vocal from the beginning. And that's also the reason why we accepted the celebrity investors, because they're also very difficult to handle, I have to admit. However, at the end of the day, they really help us to follow this mission of making the company accepted by a mainstream of people that didn't even have cannabis on their radar. But now even CDU people tell me, oh, Mario Götze is invested in you. So what is that reason? And then I tell him that he has big successes in his team of taking CBD after sports. He completely believes together with his doctor that is helping him, especially because he's not a young player anymore. And that suddenly makes people open-minded of cannabis because they know Mario Götze and they think if this guy is into cannabis, it can't be that bad. And that is something that we try to do constantly. At the end of the day, there are probably a lot of things that you can do to have a successful fundraise. I named a few here. It's really from showing that you can make revenues to your vision, communicate, educate, show substance, no straw fires is something that's very important to me, to not only show, hey, the market will be 10 billion next year, but then don't have a substance to confirm that. Then really something that differentiates you, like just being a wholesaler is, I think, a very valid business model. But if you don't have a vision of where wholesaling of cannabis goes into the next 5 to 10 years, I think that will be the first question that normally investors ask you. Then hire the best team and also know your regulatory game. So where did it lead us? It's publicly available information, so I'm not telling you any secrets here. So with our Series A we raised last week, we now raised a total of 60 million. Most of that will actually go into medical research. It will go into the finalization of our medical device. It will go into our phase 2 clinical trials of our finished pharmaceuticals. But obviously also, we also want to increase our revenue today. So we have basically a field force that is supporting, educating doctors. We want to go into more countries. But at the end of the day, as I said in the beginning, to close it off, I'm not believing that everything I'm telling you is the golden rule of how you need to do it. I can only tell you what worked for us. And I think part of this story, by having talked to so many investors, that was something that is working, and I strongly believe into our mission. And I think the fact that so many investors came in over time and believed in that mission too shows us that we're doing something right. And as I said, I'm not that arrogant to think that I know the truth and I know the right answers to everything, but I think maybe hopefully that gave you a few hints of how a company that is successful in fundraising acted in the past, and maybe you can actually take 1 or 2 things away from this presentation that might help you in the future. A few reasons why you should invest into cannabis now. How much time do I have left?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. I quickly can go through it. I really believe Sometimes I hear from many people, especially now with the psychedelics boom, they're telling me, oh, but cannabis is so 2019, psychedelics is the next thing. And I strongly believe that psychedelics will play a big role over the next 10 years. However, I still believe that we are just at the beginning of cannabis. And especially with the regulatory environment changing in Europe, it will go slower than we all expected. It might go even slower than we expect today. But I still believe there is a really bright future for cannabis if we do it rightly and if we really succeed in creating a sustainable industry and not just an industry who want to pump and dump, building up businesses quickly just to exit them. I think that will damage the industry. But if we are all building sustainable businesses, I believe we have a great future. And why do I believe this? I really believe that in the last 5 years, I think Tjag Erklen sold it as well, more happened than in the 15 years before. So we really see things speeding up. We still see that cannabis is undercapitalized. We still see that there's a lot of ideas in the market, but not enough money. So it's really the right time to invest now. We have the opportunity, depending on what you like and where you see your company yourself. I think we have the potential to disrupt a lot of different industries, from the cosmetics to the alcohol industry, to the pharma industry, to the beauty industry. So there's a lot of actually touch points where cannabis can be disruptive. And disruptive is, from the tech background, exactly what I like to do, to disrupt industries. And I think cannabis has still a lot of potential here. And then, obviously, I think we are still ahead of our time in Europe. I think the CEO of Curaleaf, who acquired Emmac just recently, said that he believed that Europe is where Canada has been in 2017. I think it's a very optimistic view of the situation, because 2017 it was already legal in Canada, so it's not here. However, I still believe that Europe has the big times just ahead of us. The question is only how far ahead of us. And I think that's something also super important, especially when we compare ourselves to classic pharma and traditional pharmaceuticals. I can imagine, like, on the first day I came into the company and I met our new pharmaceutical team, they were all people from the pharma industry. They said, it doesn't matter if it's synthetic or if it's natural. Like, it's all about the ingredient. And I think to a certain degree it's right, because depending on the entourage effect and everything that's attached to that, I strongly believe that the ingredient is what counts. However, you see there's a global trend towards more natural alternatives, more natural alternatives to what you previously used. There is a trend towards mindfulness, and many people associate the natural cannabis plant with those topics that I think are really mega trends in our society. And that's also the reason why I still believe that we are just at the beginning of where cannabis can lead us. And I think that positive attitude we need to take to go to investors and talk to them, to actually show them that the cannabis industry has a lot to offer and that we are just at the beginning. Thank you very much.